Damien Hines?
Thank you very much, Julian. And in this inquiry to date, we've focused mostly on the divvying up of the 70% of revenues from streaming services. But I think what's really interesting in this section is to look at the other half. That is why the revenue number is what it is and why the 70% is 70%, not 60% or 80%. And we're all familiar with the charts of global record industry sales over the last few decades. There was a huge peak and then a terrible trough. You don't nearly so often see figures that adjust for growth markets. So in other words, take a per capita view of revenue. Do any of you have data on how much the typical music-loving punter is spending on music in somewhere like Britain or North America today, not just compared to the trough, but to the peak of the music industry? It's an open question for anybody who has numbers to answer. You'll be the first in this inquiry who have been able to.
I'll share what we do have. Unfortunately, I don't have access to full market segment numbers, which I think is what you're searching to get towards. But earlier on, if you remember, I shared some numbers around Amazon and how Amazon could see its own numbers around.
Paul, forgive me cutting across you. I don't mean to be rude. No, that is not what I'm after at all. What I'm trying to understand is, there's a big debate going on about the way the revenue is being divvied up and whether that is fair, and why musicians are ending up with less money than they used to have. What I'm trying to get to is mathematically, is that entirely because of the divvying up, or is it because of the number that is being divvied up? And so far as I can make out, nobody seems to have this data. Is that true? Horatio?
I have a few figures. I don't know that they directly answer your question, but I think help put some boundaries around it. And this may be an area where we could try to come up with some data. You have to look at the economic impact in the UK from two perspectives. Number one, the consumption in the UK and the value of the royalties that are generated by consumption by the UK public. But then I think more significantly, we focused on UK talent and how much revenue they can generate globally, right? In the UK, we know for Spotify alone that in 2020, we generated more than 550 million euros. Unfortunately, I have, because our accounting is in euros, I don't have it in pounds, but that is just for consumption in the UK, the royalties that were paid there. But we also know that we have numbers that indicate sort of the growth of the British music industry over the last few years. Since we launched in the UK in 2009, the number of songwriters has increased, from 115%. The number of artists has increased 145%. There were only 5 UK major labels 20 years ago. We license music for 750 right holders in the UK today. So in a sense, what's happened is there were sort of a handful of gatekeepers in the industry. And what this new paradigm has created is, in a sense, democratize access to streaming by allowing a number of other players to actually have their music distributed on a global basis.
Although, of course, the flip side of that is, with a fixed price per consumer, that means there's fewer people. There's more recipients than to have revenue distributed between.
That is correct, but let me just and excuse me, pardon me, but let me just add one thing. It is true. On the other hand, the model has allowed British artists to find paying users in markets that in the past they didn't have. For every pound, for every stream in the UK, 4 streams happen outside of the UK.
So I'm absolutely not here to dispute that. I'm just trying to understand the way that the way the numbers work. Can we just, and staying with you, if I may, Horatio, coming on to the 30%, 70% revenue split from. So where did that 30% number come from originally?
you know, I don't have the historical knowledge on how that actually happened in the negotiation rooms, and I think it happened over time. The reality is that labels demanded a majority of the revenue to go to them, and then we had to clear the rights with publishers around the world. The rates for publishing historically were actually lower than they were today. I think there's testimony even in the context of these hearings that it's gone from an 8% rate to a 15% rate over the years, if I'm not mistaken. So some rates have stabilized, other rates have actually grown over the years, and we've ended up around that area. Some of it was decided on those initial agreements. Some of it, some of this evolved over the years.
Do you have a sense, or this could go to any of the three witnesses, do you have a sense of what the physical distribution costs are per song compared to what they were in the old days of people going down to HMV or R price?
So not quite sure what you mean by physical distribution, since there isn't physical distribution.
No, well, quite. The cost of production, distribution, basically getting the music into the hands, or in this case, I suppose, the ears, physically of the punter.
So in our case, we know that about 10% of our global revenue in 2020 went into research and development. I don't have a specific breakout with numbers, but I know, for example, their cloud cost associated with our having our content hosted by cloud providers, in our case being Google, but other people use Amazon, other people may use other services. Those costs are quite significant. They're clearly sales and marketing costs associated with a launch in a market and the promotion of the content or things like that.
But that's in a different category. There certainly are, and we may have a chance to come on to market share growth and customer acquisition costs. I mean, it is interesting, fascinating, some might say, that with the relatively low physical distribution costs that exist, how your company is not profitable. I mean, presumably this is because of huge amounts of money going into sales and marketing to grow share.
Well, actually, if you talk about distribution, the world of physical distribution that existed before, when you had to print a vinyl record, you had to package it, you had to ship it, you had to store it, you had to put it in a retail store, you had to market it almost on a retail basis with radio stations. Those were costs that labels undertook. And as the internet has allowed for frictionless distribution, those costs have been driven out of the equation. And that has, for the most part, just go straight to the bottom line of labels that have benefited from that. Of course, on the other hand, they faced other challenges and emerging competition from independent labels and do-it-yourself artists. So they also have their own challenges, but the reality is that was not a cost saving that we realized. It was a cost saving that labels realized.
So if the record labels are able to pocket the savings from production, retail distribution, point of sale, and all the rest of it, what's the equivalent in the record label's former P&L? What's the equivalent to the 30% of revenue that's going to you?
Maybe I could come in here, because I've been involved in entertainment retail all my working life, all the way back to the time behind record shop counters and selling at Amazon, but also now running a streaming service. So I can think about this question across a number of different angles. And I think one of the key things to realize is that during that transition, there's also been a bit of a transition of who does what. So when we are a retailer, we still sell CDs and vinyl. Really, we are fulfilling a demand that is created elsewhere. So the marketing, the discovery, what drives someone to look for that artist generally happens somewhere else. Someone else carries the cost for that. But actually, with a streaming service, we're part of that process too. So streaming services are very much about driving discovery. They're very much about marketing artists as well as marketing their own service. So some of the cost is also transferred into streaming services from what was done before, because there's this blurring of the lines over who does what. And I think as a streaming service, you play a much more active role in helping an artist break than we ever did as a retailer. We play a much more active role in helping music lovers discover artists that they'll love, and also helping artists connect with their maximum fan base possible. Those are the things we aim to try and do. So I do think that some of the costs have moved around quite a lot in this model from the time when I look at our CD and vinyl store to when I look at our streaming store.
Okay, if we had longer, we could probably have a good discussion about what the real cost of introducing people to new music is if they're already subscribing to your system, but we don't have more time, so I'm going to move on, Paul, if I may. Can I ask you what percentage of your users, and Horatio, I'd like to ask you the same question in a moment, what percentage of your users are subscription paying, specifically for the music service? And in any year, what proportion of them upgrade to paying? Sorry, of those who are not paying, those who are on the free service, what proportion upgrade to paying a subscription? Paul.
So for Amazon Music, we have Amazon Music Unlimited, which is our full catalog on-demand streaming service, the equivalent to the ones that are run by other services. We do already have an HD tier. I know Horatio mentioned that earlier for Spotify for the future, but we have that in place already. But we also run something called Prime Music, which offers Prime members access to a very limited catalog. It's around 2 million songs, so quite a lot less than the full catalog service. And that comes as part of their Prime membership. They're paying for that as part of their Prime membership, of course. And we very recently, only a year or so ago, launched a small ad-funded tier, which again has got a small amount of songs, and it's around 2 million songs. I don't have the precise splits in front of me. The vast majority we do not have many customers in our ad-funded tier at this stage. It's still quite new. The majority of our customers are in Amazon Music Unlimited. What I'll do actually, if it's okay, Mr. Hines, is I'll write to you with a more accurate breakdown rather than me to try and do it off the top of my head here. Prime Music's been running slightly longer than Amazon Music Unlimited, but Amazon Music Unlimited is growing much faster.
Thank you. We'd appreciate that. And also, when you are right, could you also say how you apportion revenues? So obviously, if you buy Prime, you're buying a bundle, which also includes films and parcel delivery. So how you allocate revenue to the music part of the service would be very helpful. Horatio, can I ask you the same question about the split between free and subscription paying? And in any, I didn't actually, I forgot to press you, Paul. Maybe we'll get a chance in a moment. Horatio, also the proportion of people in any one year who are not paying who upgrade to the premium service.
So we have 155 million subscribers. That's a figure that we released as of December 31, 2020. And we have 345 million monthly active users. So that gives you a sense of the overall number of users, including free, as well as the portion that subscribes. So it's a number that is quite significant. We know that about 60% of subscribers were people that started using the service on the ad-supported tier and then were successfully converted into the subscription tier. So we know that it is quite an effective funnel of users that first begin with the free tier and then convert into full subscriptions.
Sorry, forgive me if I didn't follow entirely the first part of your answer. I think you were saying how many were fee paying and how many were not. Could you just give us those numbers again?
Yes, and by the way, those figures are public. They're released in our annual accounts. But it's 155 million subscribers. That is, people paying subscription.
Who are paying,
fees, correct? And then 345 million MAUs, or monthly active users, which is a measure that's used in services like ours to measure the total number of users of a service. And
in Life's Great Venn diagram, sorry, the first figure is a subset of the second figure. Is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. So I haven't done the maths in my head, but it's a substantial proportion. But it's certainly not the overwhelming majority who are paying.
Well, think of it as there's 155 million subscribers and 199 million ad-supported users.
Okay, thank you. And can you tell us a bit more about how the free service works, starting with who decides what goes on it? Is that the choice of the record label in every case, which artists are only on the paid for service and which tracks within each act?
Well, in our case, in the free service, the selling proposition that we have is that even though it may be a service that adds more friction, obviously has ad interruptions and a number of things that make it somewhat less enjoyable service, we offer the full range of catalog that we offer in the subscription tier, but we offer it in free. Now, there are a number of restrictions of, the users cannot listen offline. There's a limit on the number of times they could listen to certain tracks. So there are a number of restrictions that are there to persuade and incent the user to upgrade to the subscription tier. And by the way, over the years, we've refined those terms. Those are negotiated with major labels and with publishers. And we feel that we've had, and I think our partners would say so too, quite a healthy conversion rate from the ad-supported tier into subscription. And a lot of the driver of this is that there is limited on-demand capabilities. I mean, the ability of a user to play a particular track of a particular artist on demand is very limited. And that is really a key feature that drives users to want to upgrade to the subscription tier.
And how does the remuneration work? Do you effectively pay a different amount to the record label for a song heard through the free versus the premium, or is it all just melded together and then divvied up at the end of the year, or how does it happen?
So we have revenue share agreements on both sides. We have revenue share agreements on the subscription side. So there's a pool of revenue that comes from the monthly subscriptions that we receive, and those get allocated on a pro rata share among the different labels, and then they do in turn the same thing with their creators. And likewise, on the advertising revenue on the free tier, we have revenue share agreements with respect to the revenue that we generate on the free tier. And it works the same, except that one is based on the subscription revenue pool and the other one is based on the advertising revenue pool.
And in terms of the actual revenue, whether it's subscription revenue or ad revenue per song, what's the difference between how much money you're making for every song played on the paid for and on the free?
I don't happen to have that.
Okay.
Let me just say this: we have public information that dissects all of this in the context of the filings that we do with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We would be happy to submit that. The actual numbers I don't happen to have right in front of me. Obviously, the revenue is lower on the ad-funded tier. That is so by definition. The way we look at it and the way we encourage, obviously, our partners to look at it is, as I said, as a highly successful funnel on finding users that previously were not paying for music to on-ramp into our service and then to go further into subscription. In terms of the overall split, about 90% of our revenue comes from the subscription business and 10% of our revenue comes from the ad-funded tier.
So obviously every person who signs up to the free service, that is, in a sense, it's a revenue loss in the sense that you haven't signed them up to premium. So there's an opportunity cost to that person. But is there any actual cost to you running a lost leader marketing program like this?
Well, the way we look at it, it's a funnel into the overall revenue. So
we know that's how you look at it. We know that's how you look at it.
So that they're obviously.
But it's buying your market share, isn't it? That's the point. It's funding your market share, and you're not taking the risk on it.
We, unlike other companies who can build on their Prime subscription audience, or they can build on their iPhone installed base, or their home speakers, or things like that. The only thing we have to be able to find these customers and attract them into our service is our free service. And especially as we launch in markets, in emerging economies where there's a high potential in terms of users, but are economically challenged, it is a highly efficient way of monetizing music in markets where piracy would have been rampant just a few years ago. So in fact, it contributes to growing the pie in a very significant way. But yes, I mean, the freemium aspects of our service are a critical element for us. We think it was an innovation as important for us as some of the technological innovations that enabled streaming to work, and it is a fundamental element of the value proposition that we think has proven successful over the years.
And finally, can I ask each of you, if there was no YouTube, would you have a free streaming service? Start with Horatio, as we're with you now. If there was no YouTube, would you have a free service?
I think for the same reason, the same logic that I provided before, I think we would, but there is no question that we see YouTube as a competitor, particularly in
Sorry, no question in that you definitely do, or no question in that you definitely don't?
I think we would continue to have it as a way of finding users to put into our product.
Sorry, forgive me. When you said there's no question that we see YouTube as a competitor, I mean, do you mean we obviously do see them as a competitor, or they are so different, we obviously don't see them as a competitor? That's my question.
No, they're obviously a competitor to our service. People in some markets look at the YouTube service as a substitute for their music consumption. So that is a challenge for us too. But I think I do believe that the freemium service has value on its own, and it obviously would be hypothetical, and I would be speculating, but I would be surprised if we didn't have a freemium model, even in the scenario where YouTube didn't exist.
Thank you. And Paul, taking Prime out of it, just looking at your ad-funded free model, if there were no YouTube, would it exist? You can be very brief.
Yeah, I think it would.
Thank you. And Eleanor, I know your model is different, but how would the world change for Apple if there were no YouTube?
I think the world would change in that I think more people would probably be using Apple Music, but it wouldn't change our service. We don't think that an ad supported service can generate enough revenue to support a healthy overall ecosystem. And it would also really go against our fundamental values on privacy.
Thank you. Back to you, Jenna.